Communication is one of the most essential ingredients to role-playing. In this discussion with Jake from the Wisdom Check channel, we explore how and why communication is so important.
But aside from that, understanding the people around your table matters most. But before you can do that, you kind of have to develop how to communicate. Like, you can't understand what's inside their head if you don't have a process by which they can get that out and you understand it. So learning interpersonal communications, at least the basics of how to reflect what somebody is saying to you in a way that makes sense to them and sounds original, like you did think it through, to build a basis of understanding and a relationship is important to allow everybody's creativity to flow, because you need to communicate before you can roleplay.
That's a great point. Yeah, that role-playing is a form of communication. And so adjudicating the rules and being the referee also requires communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we lose track of that. And I think it's a good point that role-playing games probably have the most communication required of any type of game.
Oh yeah, board games, you could probably just shut up the whole time. In fact, I played chess with a guy who just had his hoodie on the whole time and earphones in and just stared down at the board. It was annoying.
I could see that. And he may have like kind of scored some intimidation points doing that as well.
I think he did. I lost a couple of times in the tournament from him.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a great example of how like that's a game you can play without talking to your, the other player one bit, right?
Yeah.
Where like there's no way you could just come to a role-playing game and never say a word, right?
Yeah, you really can't. Like, I had a player once who did show up and say very little. I understand he was shy, but somehow, like, he played a character who spoke Celestial, and he decided to roleplay that as speaking Japanese because he spoke some Japanese. The dude was American. I spoke with him in English. I mean, I'm pretty sure he was like naturally born here, but he said very little else. And like trying to pry information out of him about where his character was going or what he was doing was so difficult. And it doesn't make fun for anyone, including him. So we would just like hear this random babbling sometimes, and that's not really engaging with anybody.
Right. And so that becomes a factor in all this, right? That being a referee isn't just about rules lawyering, right?
No, it's about knowing how to talk to people too.
Right. So shifting gears, because we did say that the other part of being a referee is not just adjudicating the rules or making rulings. It's also a matter of dealing with, players and their conflicts at the table. Like part of the refereeing is helping your players relate to each other, understand each other. What are your thoughts kind of examples of when you've had to referee player conflict, not player character conflict?
First off, that all comes back down to interpersonal communications. And you need to. Okay, so it helps at the beginning of a game gathering together before you really make characters and start in world to have a session 0 that establishes guidelines for communication. And they're not just things like don't be a jerk, don't go off on your own, make sure you tell me what you're doing. It's also things like here's how we're going to communicate. If you have a personality conflict or an issue out of character, tell me about it. I'm going to reflect to you what I understand from it. If that's wrong, you clarify for me. If it's right, great, we'll go ahead and talk to the other side of the conversation. Or something to that effect. There are a lot of guides on how to communicate, how to establish interpersonal communications between a group of people. But they all come down to really similar things. Make sure that the person that has the complaint feels heard, not just is heard, because you can't judge that. They have to have the acceptance emotionally, or there's still some sort of conflict there. So however that needs to happen, communicating back and forth to really rule out that you might misunderstand, to make sure you're on the same page. And then say your perspective or the perspective of the other person if there's maybe a conflict between two players, and say what you think could be a possible solution to this scenario. No matter what you say and no matter what you think is going to happen, it's important to take time during these conflicts. Because if you rush things, somebody is still upset. They might all be upset, who knows? But as maybe grating on your pride as it is, or annoying as it might be, you need to take a step back, not be personally involved, and try to understand everybody's perspective, and come up with a solution that works for everyone.
I heard like several great points in there. So, so,
Sorry for talking.
so one of those was like, you've got to check your own pride, right? Which is something
Yeah.
we do as DMs on a regular basis, right? Like
We should do.
we should do, right? Like when my players sailed the cloaker downriver, they bypassed an entire level of the dungeon.
Right.
I didn't get my feelings hurt, by the fact that they passed up all that content I had prepped, right?
Yeah,
Because
because it's not about you.
right, it's a cool moment. It was very cinematic, so I let it slide. I didn't get my feelings hurt that they skipped the troglodyte encounter and the Grick encounter or whatever, right? Um, so getting your pride out of the way, and then the other part of it that I heard you saying is like trying to understand both sides, right? Trying to make sure both people feel heard, right? And that is similar to adjudicating rules when you have two people who have a disagreement over the rules,
Yeah.
right? You say, okay, explain to me your interpretation of the rule.
Right.
Explain to me your interpretation of the rule, and I'll try to figure out where you're both coming from and what makes the most sense according to the rules, right?
Mhm.
It's a little bit more difficult because when it comes to interpersonal conflict, there's not a rule book.
No, there is not a human psychology rulebook that is 100% right.
Exactly. So, but you're still doing the same skills. You're still trying to hear what the other person is saying and
Yeah.
what this person is saying and understand where they're coming from and how they are interpreting the situation.
Right. It's the most important thing to remove yourself from the situation as much as possible emotionally. Understand that the entire game is not about you. Yeah, you're running it. Yeah, you're coming up with fun stuff to do, but you're just another function of the game system. You are there to help perpetuate fun. And if they have a problem with something, it's not about you. Even if it's about you, it's not about you. It's about their perception of what's occurring to them.
Right. And the goal is not to squash it so you can go back to having fun. Right.
Right.
The goal is to understand them, help them work through it so you all get back to having fun.
Right. It doesn't matter who's right or wrong. And this is something that I was told in marriage counseling quite a while ago. Would you rather be right or married?
Right. I've actually said that to people. Would you, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy?
Yeah.
So I guess kind of one last question along those lines is, so how do you get good at that?
Okay, well, make mistakes and try a lot. But if you want shortcuts, there are guides out there on interpersonal communication, including methods on mirroring exercises and how to be objective and reflect on what your own issues are or your own bias in that situation. There are guidebooks that are for free. If you want a video version, I have one on my website. Sorry, not my website, on YouTube, um, about how to de-escalate a situation. And there's a lot more detail than even that video. If you want more information, let me know in the comments of that video, and I'll try to point you in the right direction for resources. But essentially, it's a new skill, and you have accepted to do this task, whether you're good at it or whether you even realize you're accepting that. Because this group that you're running, if you're the GM, looks to you because you're the one running the story. You're the one in charge. Even if you don't want the responsibility, you got it. So if something falls apart in the game, I'm not saying it's all your fault. People have their own perspectives. They're going to make their own mistakes, and they're going to make their own actions based on judgments they have that are incorrect or at least unhelpful. But if you have these skills, you can resolve those much faster and much more positively for everybody involved. So interpersonal communication, learn what you can about it.
That's a great point. And like nobody hesitates when someone gives the advice of, well, if you want to be better at improv, go take an improv class. If you want to be better at storytelling, go read some books or watch videos about how to be a storyteller, right?
Right.
We don't hesitate to tell people, if you want to be better at that, go learn it, right?
Mhm.
But that's true. Like I think that's a really great point that you just made, that to get good at communication, you have to study, you have to learn, just like any
Right.
other skill set, you have to develop it.
You can make mistakes instead, but that's going to take a lot longer to learn.
Right. That's also such a truth of life, right? There's always the easy way and the hard way to learn something.
Yeah. And maybe you need the hard way. Maybe learning all of these facts and figures and platform for discussion. I have spent 10 hours in a single conversation before. It's not fun. But, I was stubborn and I didn't learn and I had to go through pain. Don't do that. please try to put your pride aside, your personal blocks, understand yourself, and learn how to communicate with others.
If you want to see the rest of this discussion, click the window on your left. If you want what YouTube thinks is the next best video for you, click to the right. And of course, as always, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks again for watching the Dire Den.